Okay, top. So, good evening again. So today I want us to quickly look at, on page 12, we have some conversation about land value, and we'll read that and try and kind of think about that for a bit. And then we'll go on here, urban settings. And I wanted us to think about what an urban setting means. Like, we'll look at what the text here in Torah says, but I will want us to go and kind of think about what urbanization means in this culture, perhaps, and what it can tell us also about our urbanization. So we can start talking about it and we'll see where we get to. And we can continue the urbanization question next week if we want to continue talking about it. So let's just understand the land value thing here. And first, let's read this text from Leviticus. Would somebody like to read it for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
I can read it.
So you know what, Ilara
Yes.
wanted to read it, so then you read this and then Robert,
okay, sure.
will read the next text.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
Now, when you sell property, you good, Robert?
Yep, sorry, go ahead.
All good. Now, when you sell property for sale to your fellow or purchase it from the hand of your fellow, do not maltreat any man his brother. By the number of years after the Jubilee, you are to purchase it from your fellow. By the number of years of produce left, he is to sell it to you. According to the many years left, you may charge him much for his purchase. According to the few years left, you may charge him little for his purchase, since a certain number of harvests is only what he is selling to you. So you are not to maltreat any man his fellow. Rather, you are to hold your God in awe, for I, the Lord, am your God. The land is not to be sold in harness permanently, for the land is mine. For you are sojourners and resident settlers with me throughout all the land of your holdings. You are to allow for redemption of the land. When your brother sinks down in poverty and has to sell some of his holding, his redeemer nearest in kin to him is to come and redeem the sold property of his brother. Now a man, if he has no redeemer, but his hand reaches means and finds enough to redeem with, he is to reckon the years since its sale, returning the surplus to the man to whom he sold it, and it is to return to his holding. But if his hand does not find enough means for returning it, what he sold is to remain in the hand of the one purchasing it until the year of Jubilee. It is to go free in the Jubilee, and it is to return to his holding. Leviticus, etc.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Lara. So we have
I find those dashes really confusing. Just grammatically, I'm not used to seeing so many dashes.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they chose to add so many dashes in here.
Yeah, that threw me off a little bit, just in the flow of how it was supposed to flow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so no, I have no answer to that. But we'll look at other things. Okay, so what is this all about? And there's some really good questions here. So maybe we could just use these questions today and just go through the text with them. So the first one is, how might such a land market based on a 50-year cycle being integral to the possibility of keeping Shmita every 7th year? Being integral.
It requires you to keep track of how much you have left at the end of each harvest. So like if you're needing to sell your land, it's all based about how much produce you have left. So like what the value is. At least that's what I'm picking up on.
Okay, but so how does a 50-year cycle help us, or what influence, or what does it do for the Shemitah? Oh, Robert, we can't hear you.
It prevents a sale in perpetuity. So the only land market that exists is a market in a number of yearly harvests, depending on how far you are from the Jubilee year.
I'm also thinking that emotionally, spiritually, emotionally, it creates a form of disconnect. Like you can't say, oh, this is, unless you own the land from before, unless this is the land that will come back to you in the Jubilee, if you've bought a piece of land, or if we're playing around with land market, we can never be fully invested in this land because we know that in 49 or 20 or 10 years time, the land goes back to someone else. So maybe it helps with a Shemitah in saying, I can let it release for a while because it's not really mine. Would that help? I'm kind of trying to play around with the thought here.
Maybe.
Well, but
Really.
there is a longer term investment for the fundamental. Well, you can't say that anybody's the owner except God, but there is some family or clan who are sort of the residual owners, and they have a multi-generational stake in the land.
Yeah.
It's always going to be theirs. It's always going to revert back to them, no matter what the economic ups and downs are. It's always going to come back to them, and they can count on that.
Mm-hmm.
So for one thing, that would prevent them from selling to somebody who's going to do something to the land that would like ruin it for future productivity. Although they actually might not have control over that if they're in dire straits. But at least they have an interest in preventing that.
Well,
because they know that it will come back to them ruined.
You're not taking into account the differences in people's personalities. People, there will always be certain personalities in certain people that no matter how you lay things out, they're going to find a way of abusing it or doing something that's harmful.
So
there was just one further thought that I wanted to add. It's bringing to mind some stuff that I've read by Wendell Berry, where he talks about his big thing is we have to care for the land, right? If we don't care for the land, our everything falls apart. And so he talks about the need for people who have in-depth knowledge of the land, like intimate knowledge of a particular place, based on, he says you need a multi-generational tie to that land to create that intimate knowledge. And from that intimate knowledge comes proper care of the land.
Although I would like to go back to what Miranda said, and it's interesting to take that into account. And Miranda, as you were talking about personalities, and perhaps there's somebody that has other thoughts about what land could be useful for. And then I'm thinking of this Jubilee system as a sort of boomerang, where even if you throw the land away from yourself, it's going to come back. Even if you sell it to somebody who's gonna, frack the hell out of it and take everything out, it's gonna come back to you. You can't get rid of it. And then you need to, and then just be aware of that. So I'm wondering if, in a sense, this is also, and also verse 23 that they give us here, the land, sorry, just so we all look at it, the land is not to be sold permanently, for the land is mine, says Adonai, for you are sojourners and resident settlers with me. So maybe that's also an answer to all these personalities, to the different variety of personalities. Even those who see land as an object they can sell, in the end, it doesn't even belong to them. Perhaps.
That was the verse that jumped out the most to me too, because it kind of, and I liked it because it sort of puts our contemporary ideas of land ownership on its head, right? Because it's like Aboriginal thought, like we don't own the land, we belong to the land, like, and it's so it's like it's a very different way of looking at it, and that verse 23 makes me think more of that mentality of like of being on the land and harvesting the land, but in the end it's not actually your land.
Yes, and I just want us to notice that this is because this is Torah, and they have their own narrative that the Torah wants to bring to us. We just noticed that the land belongs to Adonai, and that's just really important to notice, because that is in a sense slightly different from, or I don't know Aboriginal thought on this in depth, and I would actually be interested to hear more about that. But it's not that we belong to the land, we belong to God.
Yeah, totally. And
the land belongs to God, and Adonai allows us to live on this land, but there's a different type of, it's slightly different type of relationship.
Yeah, no, it's not the same in any way, shape, or form. It just kind of,
yeah, but it definitely reminds.
It felt like a parallel.
It does, yeah, I think.
In a way, but it's not the same.
But no, it's a really important parallel to bring in, and I think we can, if we're talking here about creating contemporary versions of this narrative, then I think this version helps us a lot with kind of reforming in our own minds what verse 23 could mean today in 2020.
Yeah.
So maybe not a kind of situation where Adonai owns the land like a man owns a wife in that time, and we're the children that belong to this man, rather a different relationship that is, but still, there's
the piece of it that jumped out to me though was just mostly like the parallel I was thinking was that the land does not belong to us. Like that was the parallel where it's like even when we own the land, it's not permanent. Like it belongs to Adonai or it belongs to itself, but it's not permanently ours.
Permanent. Yeah, that's really important to notice.
Yeah.
We need to really more think of it as like we're guardians and stewards of the land, and we've lost that kind of mentality and thought process through the industrialization of civilizations.
Yeah, okay, so yes, so all these things. So let's just notice one thing that we didn't talk about here, and I'm not sure if it exists in our economy in any place, but the fact that you sell and buy the land in relationship also to how long you still have till the land has to go back to its original owner.
Maybe with buying like crown land or something. When you're leasing crown land, I could see that. Like in BC.
Well, it's akin to buying a perishable commodity, right? If you're buying something like some fruit and it's still green and you know it's going to be good for a couple of weeks, it's different than if you're buying some fruit at the farmer's market and it's already turning brown, right? They're not going to be able to sell it for as much. So it's not quite the same scale of time here, but similar principle, similar way of looking at it.
There is also the parallel of leasing, which isn't the same thing, but like if you're if you're on a lease agreement, then you have a time limit to how long you can be on that land.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
like,
Yes.
so that would, I guess, be a closer comparison than actually buying. Like when you're buying land, I guess the idea is although you still owe that money to the bank, which, anyways, but leasing is closer because you've got an end, like a termination of the time
Yeah.
that you're there.
So, Ashley, and I just had a question because I'm not familiar so much with what crown land means here. What would that mean exactly, and how does the system work?
It belongs to the government. So I was looking at buying this piece of land out in BC because I'd like to move back there eventually, but it was crown land. So you're just buying the house on top of it, really. And then you have to hope that the government renews that lease with you every 15 years, I think it was. And to me, I don't want to just own the house on top of it. I want the stability of knowing that I own that land underneath too. But it would also really change how I treat the land if I know I don't actually own it. So it's interesting to think about this way.
So how would it change? Because this is a great example.
Well, they were talking about if you could, what you could do with this land. You could put in the septic, you could cut down all the timber and sell it. And maybe I wouldn't want to necessarily make those permanent changes if it was something that I wasn't going to own. I wouldn't want to have to make those decisions for the land because I'd be more of a steward of the land, which is what I like about crown land too, because it doesn't belong to you. You are a steward of the land.
Okay, and so just because you said if they decide, will they decide to renew the contract?
Most likely.
Sorry?
Most likely they would.
Yeah, most likely they would. We don't know. That's the thing, right? So it's interesting that here there's a set cycle. Everybody knows the cycle. Everybody's on the same cycle. You know when it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's this relationship between government and God. Like the land belongs to God. So there's this set cycle that God has created. Torah has created. I don't think God actually created the cycle. But but with the government, we don't know, right? Because it's a human thing. You can maybe convince them to lengthen it, or maybe they'll want to build a road. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just noticing the differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, Luceda, thank you. So let's just go to here for a bit and start talking a bit about the urban situation, what happens here. So Robert, you said you would read this part of Leviticus for us.
Okay. A man, if he sells a residential house in a walled town, its redemption period is only until the end of the year of its sale. A year of days shall be its redemption period. If it is not redeemed before this whole year has been fulfilled, the house that is in the town that has a wall shall be established in harness forever. For him who purchases it throughout his generations, it is not to go free in the Jubilee year. But houses and villages that do not have a wall around them, they are reckoned as open fields of the land. There may be redemption for them, and in the Jubilee year, they may go free.
Thank you. Okay, so what's the difference here?
It
Well,
gives
it seems to be an agricultural versus urban distinction, and it has to do with what the land is used for. Is the land primarily just a place where you reside, or is it a means of production? Is it for producing crops?
Okay, what else do we see about this? Yes, first of all, yeah, I think I agree.
Towns, from my memory, and this is mostly from my brother's obsession with military history, is wall towns tend to be defensible positions. So like if you're establishing some kind of civilization, and you have a walled town, what are you going to defend more easily? How are you going to mount a defense? It's going to come from a walled town, not a open area.
So the walled town has a different
Political
meaning in
position
society,
too.
political, and
Yeah.
I would like to say also cultural. We're going to read the text now that is not Jewish, but is from the area. And just to look at the cultural difference of, and you all know it. I just want us to look at it and just kind of to go back. So can you see this screen now? So if I open the PDF, let's see if it does that. Ah, man. Okay, wait, I'm gonna try opening it. I'm gonna try opening it from here. Yeah, so now I'll share the screen. Okay. So this is from the myth of Gilgamesh. Okay, and we'll just read this. It's not too long. Gilgamesh is a very big epic, and this is just the part where he meets Enkidu, or Enkidu comes to meet Gilgamesh. But Gilgamesh is the king of, I can't remember now, maybe Arach, Arach, I think. I can't remember now, but it's in the ancient Middle East. It's a
Sumerian mythology. Or
which
Sumerian.
It's not Ur?
maybe
Ur
or maybe
Uru?
Arach. I have to check, but it's Sumerian. Yeah, it's Sumerian if I remember correctly.
I think it's
And
Ur.
Gilgamesh was a king, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so not a very lovable king. They were quite worried about him, and they need to calm him down. So I'll start reading, then maybe other people can also read. A hurricane moved the mind of Gilgamesh, tornado of tantrums. He shattered the city. Even his mother veiled her face. Even the gods were goaded to gall. At last they called the goddess Aruru, fertile womb goddess who made the first humans. She made life spurt from the mud of the river. She made life spring from the clay of the uplands. The great Aruru knew the right answer, to fashion a man equal to Gilgamesh, an untamed man to tame the tyrant, an untaught man to teach him secrets. Out of the silence, out of the sunlight, out of the shadows that carpet the forest, stepped a man. Beautiful, strong like an eagle, stepped a man godlike, lithe as a lion. His hair rolled down like waves of a torrent, his beard luxuriant, bushy as barley, dense and waving, the hair of his body like an animal god who stood in the forest. A grazing animal joining his herd, gazelles ran around him down to the waterhole. He ran with animals down to the waterhole. This was Enkidu, made for Gilgamesh. A hunter saw him by chance, gazelles running freely, Enkidu with them. A giant was Enkidu, naked and powerful, lord of wild nature, protecting the beasts. The hunter crouched, quiet in the moonlight, secretly watched from safety of shadows. This was the wolfman emptying his traps. This was the wild dog springing his snares. Angry and fearful, he traveled to Uruk, told Gilgamesh, who listened with care, commanded the hunter to tell him each detail he'd seen Enkidu before in a dream. Gilgamesh frowned, said to the hunter, go quickly and find the Herdula Shamchat. Like a gazelle, she waits in the temple, offering herself in Inanna's service. Would somebody like to continue reading?
Take her with you to the place in the forest, the place where the wild man drinks from the lake. Tell her to lie undressed by the waterhole. She must be naked, a beautiful snare. Once they've had sex, his herd will desert him. Once he has known the bliss of her body, he'll want to follow her out of the forest, follow her back to the city of Uruk. 3 days they walked, the hunter and Shamat, away from the city, out into the country. 3 more they waited there by the waterhole, waiting to lure the wild man Enkidu. Shamat was sitting quiet by the pool's edge, watching and flickering fish in the shallows. When suddenly Enkidu stood there before her, she took in his odor of forest and hillside. The Hyrdul? Hierodule gasped
Girdle.
as he bent to
Mhm.
touch her, stroking her hair like the fur of an animal, stroking her thighs like the flanks of an animal. As he caressed her, he sang to her softly. Anana looked down, blessing the lovers. 6 days, 7 nights, their bodies were joined. 6 days, 7 nights, their flesh were one flesh. 6 days, 7 nights, their souls were one soul. On day number 7, they rested together. Then Enkidu set off to rejoin his herd. But now gazelles ran, flung fearful glances, hoofbeats soon distant, a patter of thunder. Slowly he came back, sat down by Shamat. There by the lake they started to talk. Why not come back with me to the city? Open your eyes to the splendors of Uruk. At all day you'll find there is singing and dancing, tambours and cymbals, reed pipes and lyres. Come to the temple of blessed Inanna, see golden statues and tablets of lapis. And there's Gilgamesh, manly and handsome, even taller than you, even stronger, more virile. His hair thick as yours, like a field of ripe barley, eyes dark as wine at the base of a pitcher. Enkidu thought of his life in the forest, untamed and free, yet lonely and friendless. Should he go now to the city with Shamat, follow the Hierodule back to the city?
Okay, thank you very much.
Is it Hierodule? How do you pronounce that?
Hirdul. Hirdul.
Hierodule?
She's like, I think it's like a sex priestess or a sacred,
Yeah.
a Kadisha. She's Kadisha. So it's,
It's one of those words that I've like read
I
reading
would
a lot, but never said out loud, I don't think.
yeah.
Yeah.
would
I've
say
never seen this word.
hierodule on the model of hieroglyphics, but
Okay,
if you said
Hierodule.
hierodule, that wouldn't be wrong either.
Okay.
Hieros.
Hierodule.
Yeah, because you say hieros, like hieros gamos, right?
Right.
Okay, right, thank you. So this is from Gilgamesh. It's a beautiful translation or kind of retelling translation, but I looked up actually this bit relative to a Hebrew translation I have of it, which is supposed to be a translation, and it's very, very similar. So she hasn't changed the story. So what do we learn here about some relationship between city and field?
It seems to be like being viewed as being tamed, like in that sense. And whereas the wild is seemed to be like untamed, like
Wild.
wild, free.
Culture versus nature.
Culture versus nature. What else do we have here?
Also, we have a bit of tyrant versus lover.
Okay.
Like with Gilgamesh and Enkidu, like Gilgamesh is like Enkidu is brought forth to kind of balance Gilgamesh's tyrancy.
Mm-hmm. He's supposed to bring in something of the, love maybe that Enkidu represents, or kindness maybe. Enkidu becomes a very good friend for Gilgamesh later on. Then they of course go and kill Humbaba, which is terrible, but we're not going to talk about that today. Wiping out nature, totally.
And then Enkidu gets killed, right? And then that
Enkidu
leads
gets killed.
Gilgamesh to try to find the secret of immortality.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then he hears the story of the flood later on. So it's a very large epic with many stories in it. It's a beautiful epic. What else can we see though about the city? What does the city represent here? So knowledge, culture.
Oh, I found it really interesting that they took a Shabbat after their sex.
Nachon. That was really interesting. Let's look. You see here, the 6 and the 7 appear again. They're resting on the 7th day.
I noticed that too, actually.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, because I was reading this for a Shemitah class, I found it very interesting. Yeah. I mean, if we look at this text and look at the Torah text and the different understandings of land ownership in a walled city rather than in the outside of the walled city. And we look at it relevant or relative to this text. What else does it add to our understanding?
There's this last stanza, or no, like on that page, sorry.
Sorry, this?
Yeah, and it's like, so this is Enkidu talking, right? To,
No, I think it's some
No.
Shamchat,
it's Shamhat, okay.
but she's
So
trying.
it's like she's trying to lure Enkidu back to the
Yes.
city.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like the city is as seductress. Cause like,
Interesting.
yeah, because it's like she's trying the word, like just the way that it's described, it's very seductive. That stanza, that all day you'll find there singing and dancing, tambours and cymbals, reed pipes and lyres. Come to the temple of blessed Inanna, see gold. Like it's very seductive, that stanza.
Yes. Yeah.
So she's trying to like seduce nature to come to the city almost.
And she, Shamchat, the priestess, is kind of representing the city. It's as if the city is sending out herself to call Enkidu into it. I was also wondering about this. Enkidu thought of his life in the forest, untamed and free, yet lonely and friendless. Should he go now to the city with Shamchat? Back to the city where he will probably not be friendless and lonely, but rather have a friend.
Yeah.
Be with people.
But I gathered what I got from that was that he had friends where he was, except now the animals were fleeing from him. So he lost his friends.
Yeah.
He didn't have the option of staying where he was and having any friends anymore.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me of the creation story where in chapter 2 of Bereshit, where at first Adam gives names to all the animals. They're his friends. He's in a deep relationship with animals. He gives them all their names, but it's slightly different because then he doesn't feel so connected to them, so he gets a woman. Here it's kind of switched slightly, but it's the same sort of idea that the friendless man finds the woman, finds knowledge, and
right. And there's
becomes part of humanity and leaves the Gan Eden.
And there's a midrash about Adam looking for his helpmeet among the animals, and he didn't find one, and that's when God created the woman.
Yeah, and I think in a sense this story of Gilgamesh tells us about leaving Gan Eden, leaving Eden, which is that wild place with animals and that free space, and going into the world. And in a sense, the city represents, I mean, I know the city has temples, but it doesn't have, but it needs perhaps temples because it itself is not sacred like the outdoor of nature. Like there's pockets of God inside the city, but the outside of the city belongs to God. Does that make sense? I'm trying this thought here now with you.
Yeah, I'm seeing it more as a sort of a realm of human, a purely human sphere, as opposed to
Godly
something.
sphere, which is the outside.
Yeah.
Nachon. Yes. So it's a human sphere and it has the temples in it, but they're little islands of sacredness inside the human sphere. Right. But outside of the city's walls, that's God's earth, Adonai's earth. So it's as if everything belongs to Adonai apart from the cities, the walled cities, which are our kind of territory in a sense. And Jubilee doesn't work there.
Is it that
Maybe.
small?
I'm not entirely,
So like
I don't know that I'm entirely sold, but
You don't have to be entirely sold.
convoluted logic.
Sorry?
Because the logic is a little convoluted of like cities
Okay.
are a human sphere,
Mhm.
but cities are built on the land that belongs to God. See
Yes.
how that doesn't quite work.
But it's like you have an embassy. So an embassy is actually, once you're in the embassy, or is it a consulate? I think it's an embassy. Once you're in the embassy, you're
Embassy and
actually
consulate are generally the same thing.
But
not
anyways,
exactly. A consulate and an embassy are not exactly the same thing. But I think in an embassy, so for instance, you're in Canada here, but once you go into the English embassy, you're not in Canada, you're in England. Legally. You can take refuge in an embassy. You can, so it's sitting on the earth that is supposedly Canada, but there's like ex territoria that is something else. So in the same way, I can imagine that cities are a sort of ex territoria from the land that belongs to God.
could we maybe see that Leviticus again though? Because I
Yes,
thought
for sure.
that I
Mhm.
thought that it was the fenced areas that did work with Jubilee, and it was the areas that were without fences that didn't.
Wait, I'm 1 second. Just
I
trying
could be
to
there were
remembering.
different rules about how you could redeem the land
Yeah,
in a city versus. So
I'd like.
this
Yeah,
is not a carte blanche that inside the city Adonai's rules don't apply at all, right? It's just there's slightly different rules.
well, you're very.
One second, I just reading out of the.
You sound like a robot, Rabbi.
Sorry.
I was going to say werewolf, but
That
okay.
too.
Why are werewolves?
Your voice is
Your
getting
voice
very
is
distorted.
horrible. It's so distorted. Yes. It's like almost we can't hardly understand what you're saying.
Okay,
so
it's the
distorted.
walled city that Jubilee doesn't apply. It's outside that it still applies.
Okay.
Yes.
Talk. Does it work now?
Yes. There we go. Okay, yeah, I was but no, you're still very distorted. I might maybe just leave and come back. Something might have just happened with your audio. Or just like mute and unmute. I don't know.
Yes. I think the spirit of Enkidu is getting revenge here.
Enkidu is one of my favorites.
Maybe it's the spirit of Gilgamesh then.
Okay, so yeah, you read this. Okay, stop sharing your stop sharing. I'm gonna.
Yeah. So what I think needs to happen is Gila should make somebody else host and
Yeah.
then leave and come back.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. Cool. I think I have to be actual host for you to leave though. Because if I'm just because if you leave and you're still the full host, it'll still end. There we go. Okay, we'll see you in a second. I hope that works.